Today we are replacing the valve cover gaskets on a 2006 Chevy Silverado. So this underneath is basically what we want to remove so that I can replace the gasket inside there. I'm going to start on the passenger side, so just have a quick look here. I'm going to remove this ignition coil assembly to get to the valve cover. So it looks like all we need to do is remove this clip and that clip so that this hose comes off. We'll probably detach these or get these out of this fitting so that we have a bit more space to move. We're going to remove all of the 4 spark plug wires, and that should give us the ability to remove this ignition coil assembly. It's got 5 bolts or nuts holding it in. 1, 2, 3, 4 over there, and then the 5th one is tucked back there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spray the clips, the plastic clips, as well as these little nuts with some penetrant fluid. Here I just remove each of the spark plug wires. Mine came off pretty easily, but if you find that they get stuck, sometimes you might want to use like a plastic panel pry remover tool, or even a flathead screwdriver, and just slowly wedge each side of the spark plug wire off. When you're working on either end of the spark plug wire, it's really the boot that you're trying to work out. You don't really want to pull the wire itself ever. It could come apart. And here I'm just removing the plastic clips and wiring harnesses. And I apologize for the bad angle camera work. I realized after shooting this that I either should have placed the camera in a different spot or actually recorded the part where I work on the driver's side, because I happen to be right-handed. So now I'm removing the nuts for the ignition coil assembly. I do it pretty slowly because I'm just concerned about dropping the nuts down into the engine bay area and then having to chase them down with a magnetic telescopic tool. It's like a beautiful Saturday afternoon here, so the background noise that you get to hear is my neighbor mowing his lawn. Unfortunately, that's the music you get to enjoy today. With all the wires and cables disconnected, as well as having removed the nuts and bolts, now I'm ready to slowly pull out the ignition coil assembly as one piece. And there you go. Out it comes pretty easily as one piece. Now we've got full access to that valve cover, and it's time to start removing each of the 4 bolts that keep it in. Here I'm just loosening each of the 4 valve cover gasket bolts by hand first. And now I finished loosening them all up. They're held in by rubber grommets, so once they're loose, they're not going to fall out of the valve cover itself. With everything loose, now it's time to pull out that valve cover gasket. It might be a little bit snug because of the gasket itself, but just pull it a little bit. Don't pull too hard on the oil fill tube or it'll come off. But basically, that's how you pull off the valve cover. And with pretty much every remove and replace, there's always a section of this video dedicated to cleaning. So here we go. We're going to pull off the valve cover gasket and we're going to do some cleaning before we put on the new one. I've also purchased those replacement rubber grommets. They actually come with the bolts themselves. So you pull each of them out. The replacements come with the bolt as well as a rubber grommet that you push down in to get it set. Here I'm just comparing the old valve cover gasket with the new one just to make sure it all lines up. Getting ready to install it. It's got a couple or a few grooves in it, so it really only goes in one way. And so here I'm basically just getting it all set up, putting it into that slot in the valve cover and making sure it sticks in properly. And while I'm just installing this valve cover gasket, I'm just going to mention to check out the mating service on the engine side of it. Make sure it's pretty clean, and if not, you might need to do a little bit of cleaning. Stick some rags in there so you don't get any of the valve rubber gasket into the head area of your engine. And basically you can scrape, you can clean, and just get the mating surface nice and flat and clean so that when you put this valve cover gasket back on, it should sit flush and create a nice seal. Reinstalling the valve cover with the new gasket in place is pretty straightforward. You just do the opposite of pulling it out and do it gently and carefully. And just to note, those new rubber bolts and grommets for the valve cover that I mentioned that I bought, you just basically push those in so that they sit firmly in those holes, and then they're good to go. And there you go. With the valve cover gasket and valve covers seated properly, you're just starting off each of those valve cover gasket bolts by hand. Make sure they get threaded in and you know the cover is basically in the right spot. And here I'm going to snug each of them up by hand. After this, you basically torque them all down to 106 inch-pounds. I apologize, I didn't have the camera running while I was doing that, but basically, yes, remember just to set them to the correct torque before you move on from there. Now it's time to replace that ignition coil assembly. Gently put it back in place, lining up the appropriate bolt hole locations. And again, apologies for the bad camera angle. As always, start off the bolts by hand, and then when you tighten it all up, tighten it so they're snug but not too tight. I think the torque spec is like 7 or 8 foot-pounds, 80 inch-pounds, or something like that. Basically lightly snug, do not over tighten. Alright, home stretch, you're pretty much done here. All you need to do now is replace the bracket that has a fitting for those couple of hoses. Plug back in that breather hose at the top right of the valve cover. Plug in your wiring harnesses, make sure they are clipped back in. Plug your spark plug wires back into the ignition coil assembly. Place the plastic tube up top back into the gray plastic clips. Double check all of your connections, and if this video was helpful, let me know by hitting that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for all of our latest DIY and tool review videos. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope this was helpful.